In our last lecture, we were talking about behavior change and the behaviors of wellness and kind of the motivations are the things that could give us more motivation or less motivation to stick with a behavior change and be more successful. In this lecture, we're going to continue that talk about behavior change. And so, when we talk about the behavior change, we also have to talk about some of the science behind behavior change, some of the things that we know. And there are lots of different ways that you can talk about behavior change and look at it being successful and ways to design it to be successful. But one of the ways that people talk about, one of the first ways that was out there, especially for some of our more health and wellness style concepts, was trans-theoretical model of behavior change. So it's called the trans-theoretical model, and it's a model about behavior change of what we can do to make you successful in changing that behavior, any behavior that you can think of. Definitely mostly designed for smoking, and so we'll look at it through those kind of contexts, through someone who's trying to stop smoking. But with the trans-theoretical model, what this particular model does is it uses what we call the stages of change. It gives us different stages of the behavior change as we go through them, and with each of them, there are different things that are in that particular area, in that particular stage. There's different aspects of it and different things that someone would need to consider for each of those as well. And so, with the stages of change, the first stage is what we call pre contemplation. And pre contemplation is before you're even thinking about changing your behavior. So, some people say, well, you have a problem. Well, not all necessarily behavior changes mean that you have a problem. It may mean you're just not doing something or you want to do something better. But basically, you're not thinking about doing it at all. So, for someone who smokes, they're not thinking about stopping smoking. They just simply are enjoying smoking and will continue that. At some point along the way, someone in the pre contemplation stage may or may not, we're hoping that they may, will move into this contemplation stage. And so the contemplation stage is where you're thinking about changing your behavior. So the smoker is thinking about quitting smoking. They're not committing to it, they're not doing anything else, but simply thinking about, like, you know what, maybe I should do that. Maybe that'd be good for my health. Thinking about those things. And that could be driven by all different kinds of things to move someone from pre-contemplation to contemplation. A friend, a doctor, it could be a information on an ad or whatever. And so that person's thinking about it. And then after we've thought about something, if we decide to start changing our behavior, what we do is we would move into the preparation stage of change. And the preparation stage is where we're preparing to change our behavior. We're not changing, we haven't changed that behavior yet, but we're getting ready to. So it could be the fact that you find a smoking cessation class or a group of people to go meet with that talk about them struggling to quit smoking. Could be talking to your doctor. Could be getting nicotine gum or reading on the internet about how do you change and when should you and all of these things. With someone getting ready to exercise, it could be buying a gym membership or buying out workout clothes. Someone who is wanting to change their eating habits, maybe it's buying healthy foods or learning how to cook or things like that, would all be in this preparation stage. Um, from that point, once preparation is done, or maybe even while it's still kind of going on, someone then may enter the action stage of change. And this is where we start changing that behavior, where we're actually changing what we're saying we're doing. Action stages is that kind of we are doing exactly what we said. We're stopping smoking, we're exercising, we're eating better. Anyone who's ever done a behavior change knows that this action stage is probably one of the toughest ones when you actually start changing that behavior and realizing that maybe it's more difficult than you thought it was. And with this particular stage, we're implementing those things in the preparation, and maybe we're having to change some things because they weren't working. But this is the action stage, and we continue to be there. At some point, as you change your behavior, that behavior starts to get a little bit easier, and a little bit easier, and a little bit easier, and eventually, that change will become a habit, and then from there, eventually, it becomes just kind of more of who you are. It becomes something you're not actively having to think about. You are just being able to not do or to do that behavior, so you're just not smoking or you're just exercising, and it's not something you're actively having to think about as much. And when that happens, you enter the maintenance stage where the behaviors become much easier. It's much more automatic. It's not something we're worried about you struggling with as much. So it's very built into who you are at that point. And so with that, it does take some time to move from action to maintenance. Some of these other stages of change can happen very quickly, but the action to maintenance stage, the quickest, if someone did a behavior change perfectly, the quickest it could happen is in 6 months. Okay, 6 months. So it takes a smoker, if they stop smoking today, 6 months from today would be the earliest they could say they were in the maintenance stage. And that's if they did it perfect. And most of the time, our behavior changes don't go that well. And so it would be even longer. So 6 months of actively changing that behavior and doing very well at it. From that point, the last stage of change we have is what we call termination. Basically, we're terminating that behavior. We're done changing that behavior because it's now a part of who we are. So in smoking, this works really well. So someone stops smoking for 6 months, they enter that maintenance stage, and then maybe they don't smoke for, it's been 2-3 years at this point. If you've ever met someone like that, that person is not a smoker. They wouldn't even necessarily be considered a smoker any longer. They were someone who once smoked. They don't really think about it at all. It's not even a temptation. They can be around other smokers, and it's like, well, it's a nice smell or whatever, but they're not even tempted to do so. And so they've literally terminated their behavior. They're done changing their behavior. But there's a bunch of question marks after it because not every behavior change is going to be able to have a termination stage. Exercise would be an example. You've never exercised so much in your life, you're like, I'm done. I never have to exercise another moment in my life. I wish that was the case. Eating is the same way. You can't say, well, you know what? I've eaten enough salads. I'm just going to eat nothing but Twinkies for the rest of my life. Well, there is no termination stage to some of our behavior changes. Now, when we look at these, and your book kind of gives you an illustration of how this is not just a linear path. You don't go from one stage to the next. There are relapses in this particular model, and the fact that we can go backwards in stages as well. And most of the times we will go backwards in stages. Very rarely does anyone go all the way through without having to go backwards. And relapse is simply moving in the opposite direction, but going backwards in these stages of changes. So someone maybe hasn't smoked for 8 months, but then all of a sudden they smoke again. And so maybe they're back in the preparation stage, or they could even start smoking and be like, well, do I really want to change this behavior? Or even go all the way back to the beginning and start smoking after not smoking for a year or even 10 years. Maybe they've terminated and they go all the way back to pre-contemplation smoking and saying, you know what, I just like it. And so this is that trans-theoretical model. It's one way of kind of describing and helping with a behavior change, and there are other ways as well. So we've kind of covered that, and so we want to talk about, after you've kind of set this up and looked at this and figured out where you're at and kind of set that plan, that you need to make that plan personal. I can't make a behavior change plan for you. I can help set one up and kind of get you moving down the right road, but you have to make that plan personal for who you are. And so that starts by monitoring yourself and noting the conditions around it. So trying to figure out what makes you successful at changing a particular behavior and what keeps you away from that. So you're trying to identify patterns. Maybe I don't eat well every Tuesday, and Tuesdays are a day where I have a lot of classwork and my job requires me to go in really early, and so I don't eat well because I don't have as much time. Or maybe I realize that I use heroin a lot on Saturdays, and Saturdays I'm with this certain group of friends, and so maybe that is a reason for that. So you're trying to note patterns and conditions around things so that you can build a plan that is specific to you, and so you can develop what we call SMART goals. Anytime you see all capital letters, that means that each of those letters, it's an acronym, each of those letters stands for something. And so we want to use all of this information to help build ourselves goals, because goals give us a direction to head, and we want to make sure these goals are SMART goals. And so when it comes to a SMART goal, the S in SMART stands for specific. So we want to make sure our goals are specific. A goal of I want to be healthier was a great goal, but isn't very specific. Healthier could just mean like, I feel healthier now. Like I take a deep breath and I feel healthier. Cool, I've achieved my goal, done. But most of you would agree that that doesn't make me healthier. So we need a goal that is specific. So a way to take I want to be healthier and turn it into a more specific goal would be, maybe I want to eat healthier. Is that more specific? Sure is. It tells me exactly how I want to become healthier. I want to eat healthier. Now, with that, that's not the only component we need. We also need the M, which is measurable. We need that goal to be measurable along with specific. I want to eat healthier is not very measurable. I want to eat healthier. Well, cool. I could say, you know what? I deem this to be healthier. So I deem a Little Debbie's cake to be healthier than a Twinkie. So cool, I've eaten healthier. It's not something measurable. So we need something measurable. So um, maybe what we could look at is I want to eat healthier. So how can we make that measurable? Maybe I want to, I don't know, eat one vegetable, right? Is eating a vegetable specific? Yes. Is that something you can measure? 100%. I want to eat a vegetable. Awesome. To become healthier. That is a specific and measurable goal. Now, with that being said, it is measurable. And so we see those things. Maybe it's to eat one vegetable or two vegetables so we can make it even more specific and more measurable. So maybe my goal is to eat one more vegetable to become healthier. Awesome. But we still have other things to consider, like the A, which stands for obtainable. Is it obtainable for me to hit this goal? So usually most goals that we set forth are something that is attainable for us so that we can actually achieve them. Can I eat one more vegetable? Sure can. That's not a big deal. But for some goals, maybe they aren't attainable. And they're very few and far between, especially when it comes to related to our health and our wellness. But it could be, if I said that I want to be able to fly, okay, unassisted through the air. So I'm using nothing. It's just me, my body. Well, that is something that is not attainable at the moment, right? Like I can't grow wings yet. One day genetics will let me grow wings, but I can't yet. So that goal has to be attainable. And when we think about attainable, it also has to be something that's reasonable and realistic. So is our goal reasonable and realistic? And sometimes that's gonna make a difference on these things. So is a goal that I want to eat one more vegetable obtainable and reasonable and realistic? Sure is. That one's not an issue there. But we could set a goal. Let's say that I had a goal of I want to become an Olympic track runner, okay, an Olympic athlete. Well, that's specific. Can we measure whether I can become an Olympic athlete? Sure can. Is it obtainable to become an Olympic athlete? Most definitely. People are Olympic athletes all the time. Is it reasonable or realistic? Well, unfortunately, this is where that particular goal comes out, is I want to be an Olympic athlete. Well, that is not reasonable or realistic. It's actually not reasonable or realistic to think any of you could it's not reasonable or realistic to think that most of you will become Olympic athletes, or really maybe any of you. And that's because Olympic athletes have been doing, at least most sports, an Olympic athlete has done a sport for 10, 15, 20 years before they get to the Olympics. And most Olympic athletes are below the age of 30. And so if you haven't already been doing something by the time you hit 20 for 10 to 15 years, the odds of you be developing enough skill to be an Olympic athlete talent to have enough, to be good enough to get into the Olympics is very unreasonable. Now, somebody's going to prove me wrong and send me an email saying I was in your class 10 years ago and you said I couldn't be an Olympic athlete. Cool, that's awesome. But it's really unreasonable and unrealistic to expect. Does it happen? Sure, because it is obtainable, but it's not reasonable or realistic. And then finally, with our SMART goal, the T is probably one of the more important ones, and that's a time component. There has to be a time component to these goals, because at the end of the day, it could make them reasonable or realistic. It could make them a good goal, and it could make it a not so good goal. So when I said that I want to eat one more vegetable to become healthier, well, cool. That had everything in it but the time component. And that's going to make a huge difference, because if I just said that I want to eat one more vegetable, my goal is to eat one more vegetable, well, cool. As long as I do it before the day I die, as long as I eat one green bean before the day that I die, I would be considered to have achieved that goal. However, if we turn that goal and say, you know what, I need to eat one serving, which is even more specific, one serving of vegetables by the end of today, well, that has a time component and really make sure that I'm going to achieve that goal in something that's going to be beneficial. Weight loss could be very related to time component as well. So someone could say they want to lose 20 pounds. Awesome. That's great. That's a great goal. But the time component could make it a difference between whether it's reasonable or realistic. So if you want to lose 20 pounds in 3 weeks, that's unreasonable. It's almost unobtainable. We could. It's just not going to be fun. But if you said you wanted to lose 20 pounds in 5 or 6 months, that's a really great SMART goal. So if you follow these 5 things, you too can have SMART goals that will help you to get to where you're wanting to go. Other things about making that plan personal is make plans, like plan out how you're going to achieve your behavior and include your barriers so that you can work your way around them. Realize I've said that you need to look at your barriers like 15 times throughout this particular chapter. It's super important when it comes to your behavior change, is identifying those barriers. You can make a personal contract with yourself. So give yourself a reward if you achieve your behavior. Give yourself kind of maybe a punishment, but not like something like, oh, it's going to be terrible for you. But maybe it's a reward is if I eat my vegetables this week, I get to go buy that video game that I was wanting to play. But if I don't eat those vegetables this week, well, I have to take the money I was going to spend on the video game and put it in a savings account. So it hurts you now, but in the long run, maybe it's still a benefit as well. And the key with this is realize that, these contracts aren't with a professional, like no lawyer or anything like that. These contracts are personal. Everything we're doing here is personal. And so you've got to stick with your plan and don't be afraid to change it. If you realize something isn't working, modify your plan. It's A-okay to do so. And that's going to be the key with staying with it, is you're modifying your plan if it's not working. Evaluating social influences, who is helping you stay on this track and who's not helping you, and you're going to have to figure out how you can make sure that everything is pointing you towards this behavior change if it's important to you. Make sure, again, you identify those barriers because they're going to keep you from being successful, and you have to learn to recognize and prevent yourself from procrastinating, so pushing off changing your behavior, like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow or do it later, or rationalizing, saying, well, I know I didn't eat right today, but it was just, I had people over and, friends, and they didn't want to eat what I was eating or whatever. That's not good. Or blaming someone else, saying, well, if my dog wouldn't have gotten sick, I could have done X. And so those things will keep you from being successful. And so these are things you have to look at when it comes to changing your behavior. So with that, we've finished up this wellness, and so we'll dive into the further chapters where we'll start expanding on some of these things a little bit more.